The classical Japanese language. Bungo, literally, literary language, also called Old Writing. Kobun is the literary form of the Japanese language that was the standard until the early Shōwa period, 1926–89. It is based on early Middle Japanese. The language is spoken during the Heian period, 794–1185, but exhibits some later influences. Its use started to decline during the late Meiji period, 1868–1912, when novelists started writing their works in the spoken form. Eventually, the spoken style came into widespread use, including in major newspapers, but many official documents were still written in the old style. After the end of World War II, because of the surrender of Japan, most documents switched to the spoken style, although the classical style continues to be used in traditional genres, such as haiku and waka. Old laws are also left in the classical style unless fully revised. Orthography. Classical Japanese is written in an orthography that differs from modern Japanese in two major ways. These are the usage of old character forms, kyujitai, and historical kana usage, rikishi teki kanazukai. Old character forms, kyujitai. Old character forms are the forms of Chinese characters, kanji, used in Japan prior to the post-World War II spelling reforms in that country. The modern, simplified characters are called new character forms, shinjitai. A few examples follow, with the old characters on the left and the new characters on the right. Pronunciations are the most common Japanese pronunciation of the character in isolation, and translations are glosses for that pronunciation. Karada, body. Q, old times. 2, this. Artery iu, give something. Hen, strange. Suzuka, peaceful. Tame, reason. Makoto, truth. In cases like that of the first two, the entire original character has essentially been replaced by a new one, independent of the original's etymology. This type, however, is relatively rare. Another approach is to essentially replace the character with a piece of it, sometimes slightly altered, as in the third and fourth characters. Finally, probably the most common type of simplification is to change one component of the character to reduce the number of strokes and/or make it easier to write, a strategy exemplified by the fifth and sixth examples. Note that, as in the case of the sixth character, the simplification may be very subtle. In general, old character forms are identical to their traditional Chinese counterparts, but there are some exceptions. For the seventh example character, the traditional and simplified Japanese versions coexisted as different forms of the same traditional character in China, while in Japan, what is now the new character form was at the time considered a variant and rarely used, and in a few cases, like that of the eighth character, the old character form has always been considered a rare variant in China. Historical kana usage. Rikishi teki kanazukai. Historical kana usage is the system of kana, i.e., phonetic character writing used in Japan prior to the post-war reforms. More specifically, it is the version of kana orthography standardized in the Meiji period, since before that time kana usage was not standardized. It is, broadly speaking, based on the pronunciation of Japanese in the Heian period, the time frame in which early Middle Japanese, on which the grammar of classical Japanese is based, was spoken. There are several differences between historical kana usage, which is also referred to as old kana usage, Q kanazukai, and the modern kana orthography, called modern kana usage, Gendai kanazukai, or new kana usage, Shin kanazukai. Some of these differences apply primarily to Sino-Japanese readings of Chinese characters, while others apply primarily to native Japanese words. and still others apply equally to both groups of words. Broadly speaking, the differences are equals atro, hajio, rule equals. Some morpheme medial sounds currently written as and, wa, I, u, e, and o, were written as and, ha, hi, fu, he, and ho, respectively. This is because these sounds, as well as all sounds still written with and, originally had initial consonant p in Old Japanese, which then changed to in Early Middle Japanese, and then in Late Middle Japanese, split one of 5 different phonemes depending on whether it occurred morpheme initially or morpheme medially, and then further depending on the following vowel. Morpheme initially and before a, e, or o, it became per hour. Before I, it became c, and before u, it became. These 3 sounds are still written with and. Morpheme medially and before a, I, e, or o, it became with. Before u, it lost its consonant. Finally, later on in the same period of the language, the initial with was lost in all instances before I, e, and o. Note that asterisk wu never existed, leaving the current morpheme medial pronunciations of wa, I, u, e, and o, but the spellings of ha, hi, fu, he, and ho, which is this context, are probably better thought of as pa, pi, pu, p, and po, or fa, fi, fu, fei, and fo. This rule primarily applies to native Japanese morphemes, although it is crucial to the mechanics of the long vowel rule that applies primarily to Sino-Japanese words, which is elaborated upon below. The usage of ha and he to represent grammatical particles pronounced as if written wa and e, respectively, is a holdover from this rule. Some examples follow. Old spellings are on the left, new spellings on the right. Kana in parenthesis represent the pronunciation of the preceding character. Shiahei's shiaways, happiness. Chihi's a she, cheese of she, small. Note that this is the classical form of chihizarai. Chizarai. Afuau, merge. Note that every quadrigrade verb that currently ends in u once ended in fu. Mahei, front. Hono, blaze. There are some exceptions to this sound change. Although they are rare, they include ha, mother, expected form hoa, ho, cheek, expected form ho, araru, domestic duck, expected form eru, and ifuru, overflow, expected form aori or oru. The reasons for this different result will be explained by another rule below. Sometimes, as in the case of the first 2 exceptions, the sound change form exists, usually with a slightly different meaning. Hawa is a hyperformal and very respectful term for mother, or is used in different contexts. Ho is generally used in isolation, while ho is generally used in compounds. In other cases, as is true of the second 2 exceptions, the unchanged form is the only one that exists. In addition to these exceptions, some dialects may preserve these sounds as they were at any stage of the language. W ro, wa jio, rule equals. This section uses Nihonshiki romanization for and. The obsolete characters y and we are used, and the character wo is used in other words besides as the accusative or oblique case marker. This relates to the above rule, in that it reflects a pronunciation with initial with before I, e, and o that is no longer present in the modern language. This rule applies equally to native and Sino-Japanese words. The use of wo to write the aforementioned grammatical particle, which is pronounced o in modern Japanese, unless preceded by n, sometimes in song, although all morpheme-medial instances of o, whether originally or tend to become wo in song, is a holdover from this rule. Some examples: native Japanese words, wairu iru, to be animate objects, quote, kokoi, voice. Notice that an old character is also involved in this example. Wotoko, otoko, male. Sino-Japanese words, yaku and yakuan, officer. When en, yen. Again, there is an old character used here. Kawoku, keoku, house. There are no known exceptions, besides the aforementioned ones regarding wo, in Standard Japanese, and no dialects preserve the distinction between y and I, we and e, and or wo and o. But some of the Ryukyuan languages, which are also descended from Proto-Japanese, do equals diro, dajayo, rule equals. This section uses Nihonshiki romanization for the characters di and do are used in places other than changes caused by sequential voicing. Rendaku, where in modern kana, z and zu, respectively, would be used. Again, this represents a form of phonetic distinction, namely between a sound z in z and zu, and a sound d in di and do. This rule applies equally to native and Sino-Japanese words, as well as a few loanwords. Gerigo. Some examples: native words, adasawi is izai, hydrangea. Notice that this example also contains a change from y to I. Midu mizu, water. Sino-Japanese words, kaidio kaizyo, release. Notice the use of Wairo rule, explained below. Chidu chazu, map. Notice again that an old character form is involved. Loanwords, radio, ratio, radio. This one is especially notable because it is an exceedingly rare example of a sound change that occurs in a loanword from English. There are no known exceptions in Standard Japanese pronunciation, although there are many dialects, such as the Tosa dialect, that preserve the distinction between historical z and d in speech, usually by using z and zu for historical z and dz and dzu for historical d. See Shogana. In writing, the distinction is preserved in single morphemes in cases where a sequence, chidi or sudu, was historically produced by rendaku, such as in chidam yu, shorten, and sudokyu, continue, pronounced as if chisum yu and suzuki, respectively, or in compounds where a phonemic kai or su has been voiced to z or zu, such as in Medika, one's surroundings, and Kanadu kai, kana usage, pronounced as if Mizika and Kanizukai, respectively. This usage is a holdover from this rule. Equals Wairo, Yajayo. Rule equals. In modern Japanese, the small kana and ya, yu, and yo are used to indicate palatalized consonants. Yun, when followed by an ipolauum. Idan, kana of the k, g, n, b, p, m, or rose. Or ka, ga, na, ba, pa, ma, or rajayo. For example, kyaku, guest, gugyu, snoringly, nyojutsu, reality, byakudan, sandalwood, pyoko, pyoko, up and down, sanmyaku, mountain range, ryaku, abbreviation. When a small wairo, yajayo, kana follows an I-column kana of the s, z, t, d, or h rows, or sa, za, ta, da, or hajayo, the preceding consonant is changed. Shoku, meal. Juritsu, establish. Cha, tea. Ju, throughout. Suffix. Quote. Note that As noted above, ya, ju, and jo only occur in modern Japanese writing when the sequence cha, chu, or cho is sequentially voiced, as in this example, and the pronunciation is identical to ya, ju, and jo. Haiku 100. Note that the sequence hai is pronounced si, as noted above, but this difference is not reflected in any mainstream Japanese romanization system. These three kana cannot follow a rho, a jio, or w rho, wa jio, kana in this way. In historical kana, all of these examples are written with large kana, and ya, you, and yo. So the previous examples would be written kyaku, but pronounced kyaku, written gyugyu, but pronounced gyugyu. Note the use of multiple iteration marks here, explained below. Written nyojitsu, but pronounced nyojitsu. Note the presence of an old character form here. Written byaku, but pronounced byaku. Written pyoko, but pronounced pyoko. Again, multiple iteration marks are used here. Written sanmyaku, but pronounced sanmyaku. Written ryaku, but pronounced ryaku. Written shioku, but pronounced shoku. Written jiuritsu, but pronounced juritsu. Written chia, but pronounced cha. Written jiu, but pronounced ju. Written hyaku, but pronounced haiku. This is the only historical kana rule that does not reflect a historical pronunciation. It is also one of only two rules, along with the geminate rule, that create ambiguity for the reader, excluding the exceptions listed above for the h-rho rule. For instance, the aforementioned word, kyaku, is not differentiated in historical kana from the word kyaku, agreement. When written in historical kana, both are written kyaku equals geminate, soku on, rule equals. The other use of small kana in modern Japanese is in the geminate consonant mark, soku on, which is a small version of su. In native Japanese words, this symbol can be used before kana of the k, s, t, and p rhos. For example, kaka, burning hotly; masagu, direct; kito, surely; hapa, leaf. Voiced geminates are generally prohibited by Japanese phonological rules, but they occur in a few loanwords, although they are sometimes pronounced by native speakers as if they were their voiceless counterparts. For example, suraga, slugger; kiddo, kid. Kana of the n and m rhos can also be geminate, but they are preceded by n to indicate gemination instead. Gemination can occur in Japanese for a variety of reasons. In native words, it occurs either when a historical long vowel elides, as in the aforementioned masagu, originally masagu, or randomly, as in the aforementioned kito, originally keto. These examples of the geminate consonant marker, along with those found in loanwords, are written with large su in historical kana, therefore, written katsuka, but pronounced kaka; written matsusagu, but pronounced masagu; written kitsuto, but pronounced kito; written hatsupa, but pronounced hapa; written suratsuga, but pronounced suraga; written kitsudo, but pronounced kiddo. In these cases, the historical usage is not reflecting any historical pronunciation. However, in Sino-Japanese words, geminate consonants are produced by different, more regular processes, and the historical usage for these words reflects historical pronunciations. The most common way for geminates to be produced in Sino-Japanese words is by the elision of a vowel from the kana, or ki, ku, kai, or su. For example, tekaku, eligible, from teki plus kaku; gakki, semester, from gaku plus ki; nite, schedule, from nichi plus tei; zashi, magazine, from zatsu plus shi, in historical kana, where the geminate mark is used in the first, second, and fourth examples. A full-sized version of the original kana is used. However, in the third example, su is used, even though an I has been elided. The reason for this is that in early Middle Japanese, when these sounds were borrowed from Middle Chinese, the Japanese language acquired a final t in the Sino-Japanese morphemes that currently end in kai or su. Later on, these acquired two forms, one with I and one with u. Although in syllables beginning with ni, one form usually begins with z, as is the case with. So the semantic difference between Sino-Japanese syllables ending in kai or su is almost always trivial, and the historical pronunciation was identical. So they were not distinguished in writing. Therefore, the previous examples would be written tekakaku, gakuki. Note the old character form. Nitsute, zatsusi. Note the old character form. Occasionally, gemination may also result from a loss of a vowel after fu. These cases are complicated by the h-row rule, and perhaps because of that, are also written within historical kana. For example, Hoshi, Buddhist priest, from Hofu plus shi, is written Hotsushi in historical kana. While this usage does reflect a historical pronunciation, it, like the y-row rule, produces ambiguity. Furthermore, since these vowels are elided in some compounds but not others, this usage obscures the difference in a way that is essentially impossible to predict. While there are a few other processes that can cause geminates in Sino-Japanese words, they all apply to n and m-row kana, and are not written differently in historical and modern kana. Labialized consonant, goyun, rule equals, starting in early Middle Japanese. As more and more Chinese characters were borrowed into Japanese, the language acquired consonants fronted with glides. Those fronted with the palatal glide are described in the y-row rule. But early Middle Japanese also introduced consonants fronted with labial glides. I, E, CWV. These were far more limited in range than their palatal counterparts, however, affecting only the K and G rows, instead of A, U, and O for the vowels of onset. Like the palatal glides, the vowels of onset for the labial glides were A, I, and E, and used the kana, and, wa, y, and we. Finally, while the palatal glides are written with an I-column kana, the labial glides are written with a U-column, udan, kana. However, when historical kana was standardized in the Meiji period, only the syllables with historical wa were indicated. Nevertheless, some classical texts may indicate the other differences, and some resources will refer to them, so it is useful to be familiar with them. This rule applies exclusively to Sino-Japanese words. Some examples: written kwa, but pronounced kwa, and written gua, but pronounced gwa, indicated in standard historical kana. Kwashikashi, sweets. Guantan Gantan, New Year's Day. Written qy, but pronounced kwi. Written guwi, but pronounced gwi. Written qwa, but pronounced kwe. And written gua, but pronounced gwe. Not indicated in standard historical kana. Kwose kisei, homecoming. Note the old character form. Gwizen, hypocrisy. Note the old character form. Bankun, watchdog. Duggetsu, same month. Labialized consonants sometimes occur in modern loanwords, and they are generally dealt with in one of two ways. Firstly, the labialized consonant may be changed from a sequenced CWV to a sequenced CUWV, both in writing and in speech. For example, kuiku, quick, from English quick with original kw. In other cases, they may be indicated with a u column kana followed by a small a rho kana, indicating a labialized consonant. For example, quin, queen, from English queen with original kw. However, in these cases, an alternate version with large a rho kana generally exists, as it does in this case, indicating a monophthong pronunciation, and many speakers use the monophthong pronunciation regardless of how it is written. There are no known exceptions to this rule, but some dialects, such as the Kagoshima dialect, preserve the distinction long vowel tune rule equals palatalized long vowel kyo tune rule equals classical auxiliary verb mu rule equals. Modern Japanese has the syllabic nasal n, which can represent a variety of sounds depending on what sounds come before and after it. Syllable final nasals are believed by many scholars to have existed in Proto-Japonic, but all agree that they were lost by the time of Old Japanese. They first reappeared in early Middle Japanese, with the introduction of Chinese loanwords ending in n and m. Therefore, the majority of occurrences of n in modern Japanese occur in Sino-Japanese vocabulary. Originally, syllabic n and m were phonemically and phonologically distinct, although the distinction was never written down, and was lost by early modern Japanese. For example, kanzi, from Middle Chinese hnhdzih, omaku, from Middle Chinese I Minnesota k, originally pronounced omgaku. Note the old character form. However, some native Japanese words also have n. This happens exceedingly rarely, and usually results from sound elision. An exhaustive list of all examples of all regular use Chinese characters. Joyo kanji. The 2,136 characters and readings used in government documents and taught in schools with syllabic nasal in their native Japanese readings numbers only 14 readings, or 0.61%. They are from the elision of a vowel following per meter, or n. Nan, what, from nani, what, wana, woman, originally pronounced wamna, from wamina, woman, in modern orthography, and onna omina, nengoro, courteous, originally pronounced nemkoro, from nemikoro, courteous. Kan, God, in some compounds, originally pronounced kam, from kami, God, in modern orthography, using a new character form, from the elision of a full mora. Kan muri, crown, from cowberry, rank. Note also the sound change from b to per meter. In modern orthography, cowberry is koberry. Kanga few, consider, from kauga few, consider. Note that these are the classical versions of the modern verbs kanga heiru and kauga heiru, respectively. In modern orthography, kangeru, koga-yu, kangeru, and kogaru, respectively. Ton, wholesale, in the compound tanya, wholesale store. From tohi, query. In modern orthography, tohi is toy. Sakan, prosperous. From sakari, one's best days. Kanbashi, fragrant. From kaguasi, fragrant. Note also the sequential voicing of per hour, to, be, and that these are the classical forms of the adjectives kanbashi and kaguashi. In modern orthography, kaguasi is kaguashi and kaguashi is kaguashi. From the preservation of an Old Japanese pre-nasalized consonant in a modern Japanese word, kangamiru, learn from. From kagamiru, learn from. In modern orthography, kagamiru is kagamiru, without iteration marks. Donbori, porcelain bowl. From doburi, sound symbolism for something big and soft plopping down. Quote from abbreviation of another pronunciation on this list. Don, porcelain bowl, originally pronounced dom, from aforementioned donbori, porcelain bowl, from multiple processes. On, honorific prefix. Quote, originally pronounced dom, from oho, great, plus me, August, which became oomi, August, and then by elision of I, after per meter, and finally, on, by elision of the full mora, ho. Note the use of the character instead of isataji. In modern orthography, oho is o, oomi is omi, and on is on, from some semantic, rather than phonetic, process. Yon, for, from, yo, for, by analogy with Sino-Japanese. San, 3, originally pronounced sam. Of course, there are also some words with this sound that either lack Chinese characters or were coined in the modern or early modern Japanese eras, when n had been fully incorporated into the language. For example, san, all-purpose honorific, quote, originally pronounced sam, from sama, respectful honorific, quote. In modern orthography, the new character form is used, regardless of how it came to be. The Japanese orthography lacked the character n, or any equivalent. Therefore, until the spelling reforms of 1900, mu was generally used to represent the syllabic nasal. Sometimes, this convention may be preserved by modern writers, but standard historical kana distinguishes mu from n. There is one exception. In classical Japanese, there is an auxiliary verb, jodoshi, mu, which indicated the volitonal. It, too, underwent vowel elision, and came to be pronounced as per meter, and then n. However, the conventions of standard historical kana call for this auxiliary verb, and any word derived from it, to be written with mu, even though they are pronounced as n, since mu is non-existent in modern Japanese. There are no dialects that preserve the distinction expressed in this rule. However, some may preserve the distinction between final per meter and n. Miscellaneous. Two other significant differences involve the way that kana are used in general, rather than which kana are used. The first is that Chinese characters in classical texts are often fully marked with ruby text, furigana, especially in old laws and other very important documents. Ruby text is still widely used in modern Japanese, but only for characters with non-standard or ambiguous pronunciations, or sometimes in materials designed for children of foreigners. The second difference is that, especially in legal documents, katakana were often used in the way that hiragana are used in modern Japanese, to write out adjective and verb inflections, suffixes, and particles, okurigana, and for the aforementioned ruby text. Finally, kana iteration marks were far more common in classical Japanese, and sometimes used in ways that are considered completely obsolete in modern Japanese. For an example of a major document written in the classical style, see as an example the original text of the 1890 Meiji Constitution, which is written in classical Japanese using historical kana, old character forms, kana iteration marks, and katakana in place of hiragana. Although it lacks universal ruby text, grammar, verbs, dushi, equals conjugation table equals. Classical Japanese has the following verb classes and stem forms. Table notes. The placement of the or in the Japanese text indicates where the stem of the vowel is. In other words, for a consonant stem verb, I, E, the quadrigrade and N and R are regular classes. The final vowel is not considered part of the verb's root, so it is separated. However, for vowel stem verbs, I, E, the upper and lower monograde and bigrade and K and S are regular. The final vowel is considered part of the stem, except in the forms beginning in u, because these reflect an ancient contraction of the final vowel of the verb with that ending. The K and S irregular classes are also special in this regard, because they are believed to be derived from vowel stem verbs originally, but were subject to ancient contractions that caused them to lose their final vowel in all forms, and so their final vowels are no longer considered part of their roots, and are thus separated from them, even though they are considered vowel stem verbs. The yo at the end of the imperative forms of upper and lower monograde and bigrade verbs and of K and S irregular verbs is optional in classical Japanese, although exceedingly common. Verb class distribution equals. While the many conjugation classes may seem overwhelming, most of them contain few verbs. The quadrigrade and lower bigrade classes are the primary, containing about 75% and 20% of the verbs in the language, respectively. The upper bigrade class is small, about 56 non-compound verbs, but sizable enough to make an exhaustive list difficult. The other 6 classes altogether contain between 22 and 28 verbs, depending on whether basic compound verbs are included or not. An exhaustive list of these follows. Which verbs in the conclusive form, as is the most common standard Chinese character pronunciations, are indicated by hiragana in parentheses following the given character. The first spelling listed for a given verb is the most common, and those that follow are alternate spellings. Some of these spellings are generally used for slightly different connotations of the same verb, while others are simple alternatives. In later reference, only the first spelling, in pre-World War II orthography, will be used, and the transcription will be based on the historical spelling. A black cell in one, or both, of the modern columns indicates that the modern spelling and/or transcription is the same as the pre-World War II version. Table notes. Note that these translations are glosses, and may not reflect certain nuances or rare alternative meanings. In addition, the translations are for the classical meaning of the verb, which may differ from the modern meaning of the verb if it has survived into modern Japanese, either slightly, e.g., kiru, which meant to wear, in general, in classical Japanese, but means to wear from the waist up, in modern Japanese, or significantly, e.g., wairu, which meant to sit in classical Japanese, but primarily means to be for animate objects, in modern Japanese. Some may have the same meaning, but of different pronunciation, e.g., kagamiru, to learn from, which is generally pronounced and written kangamiru in modern Japanese. Also, even for those verbs which have survived with the same meaning and form, many are archaic and rarely used in modern Japanese, e.g., hairu, to sneeze, with the same modern meaning and form, but almost never used. On the other hand, some have kept the same meaning, form, and prominence into the modern language, e.g., miru, to see, one of the oldest surviving verbs in the language and also one of the most common, both in classical and modern texts. Imaskari, to exist. Honorific form, has 3 pronunciation variants, each of which can use either Chinese character, imashigarai, imasokarai, and imasagarai. Finally, the modern transcriptions are purely orthographic. For example, the modern version conclusive form of the classical verb ku, to come, is keuru, but the modern form is given in the table as ku, which is the way that a modern Japanese writer would write the classical Japanese word, rather than the way they would write the modern Japanese word. Adjectives. Kyushi. Classical Japanese has the following classes of adjectives and stem forms. Table notes. Some of these forms are very rare and used sparingly. In particular, the ke, shike, are used almost exclusively in an ancient construction called kugoho, ku grammar, which uses the arealized for to form nouns from verbs and adjectives. E.g., yasu peaceful, yasu plus ku equals yasukeku peace of mind. The construction kuba, shikuba, appears to be an arealized form, ku, shiku, plus particle, ba, since that particle usually attaches to the arealized form, but is actually ku, shiku, plus particle, ha. Modern pronunciation wa, with a sequential voicing sound change from ha to ba. The compound forms are derived from continuative form, ku, shiku, plus ri, equals kwarai, shikurai, which then became karai, shikarai, by regular sound change rules from Old Japanese. The forms then follow the irregular conjugation type like ri, but lack the conclusive form. Similarly, the basic conjugations have no imperative form when it is used. Therefore, the kari, shikai forms are used. It is, however, relatively rare, even in classical Japanese. Adjectival verbs. Kyudushi equals. There are the following classes for adjectival verbs. Table notes. Adjectival verbs are essentially nouns combined with a copula, either narai or tarai, which copula is used as specific to the adjectival verb in question. The copulas are derived from directional particles ni plus ri and tu plus ri, respectively, yielding niari and torai, respectively, which then lead to narai and tarai, respectively, by regular sound change rules. They therefore follow the irregular conjugation like ri. As with adjectives, the imperative form is rare, but is used. Miscellaneous equals. 2. Daimoto karashi. The particle is omitted more often than in the spoken style. 1. Wa sangai ni ihe nashi. See also. Literary language. Bungo nomen. A brief introduction to Classical Japanese. Classical Japanese. Net. Bibliography of pre-modern Japanese texts and translations. Bart. Book Review. A Grammar of Classical Japanese by Akira Komai. Monumenta Nipponica. Volume 34. No. 4. Winter. 1979. pp. 501 to 504. Dictionaries for Classical Japanese.